So I'm going to talk about the first two parts of Fyodor Dostoyevsky's Crime and Punishment. This is how it looks like. The one I'm reading is a translation by Oliver Reedy, which I think is one of the more recent translations. I'm not very sure. In terms of my background, I don't know anything about Russian literature. I think this is my first Russian book I've ever read. I definitely haven't read anything of Russian origin, even other kinds of papers. I know a little bit of Russian, but I haven't read any Russian books. I have a friend who recommended Notes from the Underground for me, and that's kind of what drew me to get interested in Dostoevsky. And I picked this one up because I saw it in the bookstore, and I thought it would be a good thing to read. And I listen to some Russian music. I'm a big fan of this band called Kino from the 80s. That's kind of it. I like Russian films. One of my favorite directors, Andrei Tarkovsky, has one of his films is one of my favorites, which I made a video about recently. It's called Ivan's Childhood. Yeah, it's his debut film, but other than that, I don't know much about Russian literature, Russian history, or Russian anything. So this is very fascinating for me. I'm not gonna be reviewing it in the same way you'd consider someone would be reviewing a book. I just want to talk about what I was thinking about while reading it, and maybe trying to clarify some thoughts I've been kind of confused about. Uh, so just a summary of this book, I have to kind of look at the names because it's hard to memorize all this stuff. So the main character's name is Rodya Raskolnikov. He is a 23-year-old guy who just dropped out of university, and Raskolnikov wants to murder someone. As the book begins, and we find out that that is a pawnbroker named Alyona Ivanovna. So there's this woman he wants to murder, and while I was reading it, I couldn't understand if I was missing. I feel like I may have missed some kind of context clue or something, but I don't seem to understand why he wanted to murder her. There's a scene on the day of the murder, or maybe it was the day before, but right before he murders her, there's a scene in which he is in a bar or some sort, and he overhears a conversation going on about some of these two people joking about wanting to kill this pawnbroker, saying that this pawnbroker is very abusive to her sister. She has a younger sister who she pretty much abuses and doesn't take care of very well, treats as a slave, and then she has all this money that she just kind of acquires, and she had planned to she had made this thing when she dies, none of her money goes to her sister. Her sister might get some leftover things, but then the money that would come from her death, all her riches will go to this I think some kind of religious institution or something that would kind of secure her place in the afterlife or something to that degree. Not specifically that, but that's the idea of it. So they say, it'd be great to just steal all her money, murder her, steal all her money, and then give it out to the poor in some kind of Robin Hood fashion. And that is what I was, when I heard it, I thought, oh, maybe I was mistakenly reading it as some kind of flashback to what sparked this whole interest in murdering her. But I later realized that he was talking about how he was just overhearing this conversation, and it happened to coincide with his planning. So that wasn't the reason why he wanted to kill her. And I don't know why he wanted to kill her, because he doesn't seem to necessarily hate her. She's kind of stingy with the money and things in her business, but can't quite pinpoint why she wants to kill her. And I think it might actually be the point. The point might be that it's kind of a senseless murder, and it's bizarre because after the first this book's in 5 parts. After the first part, it ends with the murder, and then it opens up with him kind of the whole part 2 actually is mostly him. He gets very sick after the murder, and he ends up becoming very hallucinatory and delusional, and he's filled with delusions, and he goes crazy, and all these things happen. But that is in part 2. But what's bizarre for me is that the moment he kills her, I guess he's filled with so much guilt, and he can't decide whether he's going to confess on himself or whatever. He ends up hiding all the things he stole, because he stole some jewelry, and he ends up hiding them under this rock in some kind of abandoned yard or somewhere. At first, when I read it, I thought it was weird. He seemed to want to get rid of all the evidence, and he even considered throwing it in a river. But he thought that He thought that if he threw it in a river or in some body of water, it might float and he might get caught. So it seemed like he had this intention to just get rid of all the money that he'd just stolen, which made no sense to me because, one, why was he even stealing money? I assumed he was stealing money because I assumed he was murdering out of wanting to get money from her. But then after he does it, he wants to just throw it all away. And maybe it partly it's because he's trying to preserve himself, I guess. He just doesn't want to get caught. Maybe the idea of getting caught is just a worse of a downfall. But he went all the way to murder this woman. I don't quite understand why his initial reaction was to just throw all the things he stole away and just go into hiding and be burdened with all this mental anguish and guilt. I feel like if you kill someone and you steal their things, you either just go all the way out with it, you get your money, run away or something, or I guess to some degree you just fess up and you're filled with too much guilt. But he has some weird in between thing where he doesn't really admit to any of his fault. He doesn't go to the police and confess his sins or whatever, but he ends up just throwing hiding the money away in some place where it'll never be found, and tries to go back home, and he ends up getting very sick, and he has his friend, one of his classmates from university, what's his name, Razumikin. Razumikin finds him and takes care of him and ends up becoming kind of his savior of sorts, where he takes care of him while he's sick and becomes and befriends all the people in his where he lives, and the landlady and the servant or person who takes care of all the things, and he becomes very friendly and all this stuff. Yeah, that thing kind of confused me, but it might be the point. Like, I feel like I don't know very much about Dostoyevsky's philosophy, but I feel like to some extent it may be that the main character is this kind of amalgamation of just all the stresses that maybe society at the time might be inflicting upon the young soul or something, and then maybe the murder is just some kind of symptom of just this weird state of mind. I don't know anything. Honestly, I'm just speculating at this point. But I know Dostoyevsky is supposed to be famous for his kind of philosophy of things, which I don't really know anything about because I haven't read into it. I want to read the book first. There are many characters in this book. Obviously, I feel like the other main character is this guy named Semyon Marmeladov, who he meets in the first part, and he's like drunk in some bar and ends up telling his life story about how he has this daughter who had to prostitute herself in order to support the family and support her stepmother in particular. And he tells about the story of how he just he's so much of an alcoholic that he constantly steals money from his family in order to spend it all drinking alcohol. A bizarre character, and who dies at the end of part 2. And what ends up happening is that there seems to be in this very fortuitous time where he somehow sees Marmeladov on the street getting trampled by a horse. He takes care of the guy and brings him to his house, where he eventually passes away. But his act of kindness has a very strong effect on the family, and the future of this book seems to be that they're going to be much closer, and perhaps he will adopt the family to some degree as his own because of this weird sense of connection. So it's very bizarre reading the book. I'm sure this is all part of the point, but it's interesting because he has this very cold murder. He doesn't seem to have necessarily a lot of guilt for it. He doesn't seem to be scared of any kind of hell or some kind of eternal suffering that comes from this eternal sin. I don't think he's much of a Catholic, but he's filled with some kind of indescribable guilt he doesn't seem to be able to comprehend very well. But at the same time, as much as he thinks of himself, I think he also thinks of himself as someone who's very cold and doesn't care about the world, doesn't care about anything, at least except for his mother and his sister. For some reason, he gets this very strong inkling to be very charitable to this stranger, this Marmeladov, and his family. I guess he was so touched by the story of his daughter, and I guess to some degree which he makes direct references to, he seems to be he cares very much. He doesn't really care. He is able to resonate a lot with the story of Marmeladov because he can relate to his sister. His own sister is would do anything for the family, just like Marmeladov's daughter, who is named Sonia, I think. And Sonia is apparently, according to this translation, is a derivative of the name Sophia, which means divine wisdom. And she's described with angelic terms, and it's very, very beautiful description of her. And I have to look for it. But when she turns up on the doorstep wearing her prostitute's outfit as she watches her father passing away, I can't find it right now. But she's described as having a feather the color of the color of fire, I think is how she's described. And I thought it was so beautiful. A feather the color of fire. I thought that was such a beautiful description. I'm definitely gonna steal it at some part. I feel like someday I'm gonna steal that phrase. The color, the feather, the color of fire. But it's just such a. I found it such a beautiful. And the thing is, Dostoyevsky's so good at describing things. He describes things that so he elucidates things so concretely that they manifest in your head, not just in its literal form, but it's on all its metaphorical illusions as well. And it's just so great. I was skimming through some Goodreads reviews, some of the more negative ones, because I was confused. I'm so riveted by the book. I'm confused how anyone could dislike it. So I was trying to see why, and I read some people say that they don't like his prose, or they don't like how he writes, or they don't like. Some guys said he could only read 2 to 3 pages at a time, and it's just hard to read. But I've had the exact opposite experience. Maybe it has something to do with the translation. Maybe I'm just reading a good translation, or one that really appeals to my own sensibilities. But I'm really enjoying this book, and I am so curious to see what happens in the book. But also, and more generally, I'm very interested in what he's trying to do, right? Because it seems like he's trying to investigate the psyche of the crazed individual, and which is very interesting to read about. There's some people who he's also considering his own mental health at some point, and at the same time, I've been reading a lot of this biography of Carl Jung, and it's very interesting how he has very specific thoughts on mental illness, and I know he succeeds Dostoyevsky by a couple of decades, but it's very interesting. I think it's just the idea of the mental health of someone, and what one's externalizations or maybe internalizations of their mental state has to say about their own personality and their own being and their own projection towards the future. It's very fascinating stuff. And what else can I say? So this book is like this version of the book is cool art and all this stuff, and actually this art is at the back. You can see it's about this guy who is abusing a horse, which is actually taken directly from this big dream that he has in the part 1, chapter 5 or so. Very interesting dream, and within the dream he is a child, and there's like they're in some kind of courtyard of some sorts, and there's a horse that's being beaten by people. They're an abused horse, getting hit over and over again over the head, just getting abused and flogged, and he's a child, and he's very sympathetic towards the horse, and he goes up to the horse and starts hugging the horse, and his father pulls him away from the horse, saying that you should leave them alone. It's just some people playing around, while the horse is getting beat up and while the horse is dying. It's a weird dream, and as he wakes up from the dream, I have to really be able to say his name if I'm gonna talk about this book. Raskolnikov. As Raskolnikov wakes up from the dream, he makes a direct comparison to him as the people beating up the horse, to him possibly beating up the woman or the pawnbroker, hitting or killing her with an axe. I think an axe is interesting as well. It's the choice of murder, but I don't know. I'm gonna keep reading this book. I'm really enjoying it, and I'll definitely come up. Maybe I'll do like a part 3 to 4 and then a part 5 and just end of the book videos as well. But yeah, this is just very fascinating for me, and I'm very intrigued by this whole thing. And as I finish this book, I want to read more about Dostoyevsky, more about this novel's history. See, I have like 3 bookmarks. One of them is for the character list, because there's just so many of them, and they have different ways of saying the names, which is kind of confusing. This is where I'm in the book, and the last one is like this is like a footnote where all the footnotes go. There's lots of very interesting footnotes here, mostly about locations and where it was specifically, and some of the literary allusions that Dostoyevsky makes to different writers and authors and things at the time are very well described in the footnotes as well by Oliver Reedy. So I highly recommend this translation. I'm very much enjoying this book, and if anyone's read this book, I want to hear your thoughts about it. Hopefully don't spoil anything, because I'm still, again, 40% done with this book. But so far I'm really enjoying it, and it's kind of a very demented state of mind to get into this character's head. But I'm kind of enjoying it, and it's very interesting, I think, to look at the depravity of the human soul and how far one would go to just, I guess, create meaning in his life, maybe, or something. I don't know exactly, but I guess meaning is something I really have to think more about in this book, because he does seem to get some sort of meaning from when he finally, takes care of this other family, or when he gives them money. He seems to be finding meaning in supporting and helping out the family of Marmeladov. So maybe it has something to do with meaning, or maybe he's a criticism of nihilism, all these nihilist theories. The thing is, there's a lot of talks about nihilism in this book, I think. or maybe it was Young's book, and I'm just confusing the two. But it seems like nihilism was a strong thing that was going around this time, and many people were thinking about meaninglessness and all that stuff. So maybe that has something to do with it. But anyway, that's all I have to say. And this video's going on for too long. But I'm loving this book.